Hello and welcome to CouchCon. This is We Open on a Stormy Night, using genre savvy to your advantage. It's a long title. I made it up. I don't remember why I wrote it. The goal of today's panel is we're going to talk about taking genre sort of conventions and tropes and aesthetics and using them to enhance your game, either by picking games that match the aesthetic you're going for or designing/changing some things around in order to kind of give the feel you want. The kind of goal to say is like tropes have a reputation for being kind of bad, but we want to show you that it can help you if you use them correctly and you use them intentionally, which is the point. Just as a quick note before we get too deep into it, before we introduce the rest of the panel, I'm Ryomasa, or John on, I'm John or Ryomasa on Twitter. I'm awake, I swear. RY0MASA, and this is for CouchCon. Also, as a note, CouchCon is helping support Doctors Without Borders, so if you do have a spare, penny, because that's the world we live in right now, please, if you at all feel inclined, please help support the doctors who are helping battle the pandemic that we are currently living in. Other than that, we're going to go around and we'll go right down the line to Simon to introduce yourself and say a little about you.
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name is Simon, and I am a LARP writer and a game designer and a voice actor and a tabletop streamer. I do a little bit of everything, but I like to write games that challenge our expectations of different genre tropes in general, and I also like to use games as a way to examine complex social issues and make marginalized people feel like they have a voice in genres that they don't always have a voice. And so I balance history and education and in performing arts and in social justice with game design. That's my jam. And I'm on Twitter at Lucha Libris.
Yes, I was going to say you should mention your socials. All right, we'll go right down the line over to Mackenzie.
Hi, I'm Mackenzie,
hi.
Mackenzie Lane Day on Twitter. I'm an independent TTRPG content creator, though I'm mostly known for my work in the D&D sphere. You can find me as a contributor on D&D Beyond, one of the co-designers for MCDM's Kingdoms in Warfare, the lead writer for Sina Una, and a bunch of other stuff on DM's Guild. In terms of streaming, you can find me in the DM's chair every Wednesday at 6 p.m. EST over on Scraticus Academy DMing a Feywild game called Downside Up, which is probably going to come up in conversation today because genre. And yeah, it's kind of, I'm excited to be here. This is gonna be fun.
Awesome. And then last but certainly not least, Grant.
I'm willing to accept the title of least on the panel.
No.
Hi, everyone. I do have a wide head. So my name is Grant Ellis. I'm an independent content creator for tabletop role-playing games. I am the producer for WebDM Show's Twitch channel, and I've done a bit with their YouTube channel. I am a game designer by trade. I've worked for Kobold Press, Monty Cook Games, a few other publishers, but primarily my background is in indie games, especially those that lean very heavy in genre and tropes. I worked in motion pictures and television for about 10 years before I switched into the technology space. And this is like my full-time job that I love and appreciate in games on top of everything else I do. I'm just grateful to be here with such wonderful panelists and a moderator who I admire a lot. So thank you for inviting me, John.
Gross. Sorry, that was my knee-jerk reaction to compliments. So
hey, John, you're amazing. John, you're wonderful.
So my involuntary dry heaving aside, so I want to really quickly sort of set up the framework which we're talking about today, just so if you're listening in, you're not confused when we talk about certain things, because a lot of people use a lot of words interchangeably, and you can tell I'm a grad student in academia because it's important to know what the words you're using are. So the way we're defining sort of genre as for the purposes of this panel is sort of the broad overarching umbrella. So it is something that is usually a set of tropes or a certain aesthetic feel that people recognize. So something like the Western or wuxia or like a rom-com or anything like that is sort of a genre. As far as we are concerned. And then the second part we're using, so tropes are anything that is a convention or a staple in a certain set of genre fiction. So for example, like the man without a name is both a character and kind of a trope now in what would be a Western. that's kind of how we're framing this. So if you, and I'll be keeping an eye on chat as well, but if you have any questions, please feel free to ask, and we'll sort of tack them as we can get along to those. But we're going to start off with a really simple question. So panelist friendos, what's one of your favorite genres, and sort of what does the vibe of that genre do for you and sort of inform the way you run games in it? And I think we'll just go straight down left to right. I think for the rest of the panel that just makes sense. So Simon, you're up first.
Sure. So currently I'm running a long-term campaign LARP, which is in a setting that is decopunk, which, if you're not familiar with the genre in general, it's like diesel punk, which is also, if you're not familiar, like steampunk, right? So Victorian era sort of technology. Diesel punk is that amped up to the 1920s to 1940s. But it's usually focused on like war and hardship and big blimps, Sky Captain in the World of Tomorrow, right? And Decopunk is like, what if you did that, but everything was more chrome? It's more focused on city living and urban stories and individuals than it is about like sprawling world global conflicts. It's a little less about like if you took BioShock, right, and made it more about just like the individual stories and less about like picking apart aquatic objectivism. So that's a genre that I have sort of come around to in recent years that I think is really interesting to play around with. I've never really been big into steampunk because of its inherently colonialist stories and history, and I think there's more interesting things, I think, in other genres for me personally. But Decopunk has been really taking me as like, what if we looked at those eras of the 1920s and 40s, and there's a lot of meat on those bones, and what if we zoomed in on real people's real world issues that are not just about, whoa, cool alternate future or alternate history, but about social justice and individual struggles that are happening during that time. You know, the game that I'm running now is about prohibition, and about found family, and about individual prejudices against people that might have like superpowers. What is that? What is that about? So that's sort of kicking around in my brain. But a lot of my cheeseburger, my like go-to takeout meal, as it were, of genres has always been like pulp fantasy. I almost want to call it sludge fantasy. Like when you listen to The Sword, or other bands that are playing that kind of like doomy heavy metal, and like, in the time of ancient darkness, the wizard Grabthar summoned forth a blade of pure lightning. Wow, wow, wow! You know, the guitar riff plays like Diablo, kind of grim dungeon punk. Too many belt buckles, big swords, all that stuff. I love that. And there's just something very fun and knowingly playful about that genre. That like, we all know how absurd it is. We know how campy it can be, but there is some interesting stuff you can do within that genre as well that I think we're toying with now more than we were in the past. But that's like my bacon cheeseburger favorite genre. Like, I know it's not great, but it's fun.
All right, let's pop on down next in line.
Okay. I think a part of it, a lot of it comes from a lot of the things I liked reading growing up. I'm a big sucker for the reluctant hero trope, or that genre, where you have someone who is either transported into a magical world or finds themselves a part of a magical subculture that exists in the modern world or something like that, and they get roped into a big adventure, and whether they like it or not, they have to be a hero, or they end up becoming a hero even though that's not what they had intended. A lot of things that I liked growing up, like Percy Jackson, I think like Chronicles of Narnia, those were my bread and butter in terms of genre. They don't entirely fit the same like mold, but the a lot of my work and a lot of my especially in TTRPGs have that idea of uh unexpected or reluctant heroes go forth and journey and adventure and be heroes and do good things and yada yada yada, save the world, blah 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 blah. It's MacGuffin, MacGuffin, MacGuffin. that's kind of my jam, more so in terms of stuff, and it works really well with D&D, especially because the whole mechanics of D&D really, 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 really lean into the hero's journey, the Campbellian hero's journey, bread and butter. This is how adventures go. So a lot of my things sort of form on that base because I do a lot of work with D&D.
Awesome. And I think we'll wrap it up with Grant.
So, and if we don't wrap it up, it's okay if we open discussion. So genres that I lean heavily into in favor are things like the Regency romance, Jane Austen novels, focusing on everyday people in everyday life, small moments that have big personal impacts, taking time to stop and write letters to each other about what we feel, as well as emphasizing the internal monologue to help inform people through play. You can't just ask someone on a date. You can ask them, may I hope to ask you on a date in the future? Is it okay if I hope? That's one side. And a lot of it has to do with the fiction that I consumed a lot through media. Being a cinematicist, I watched a lot of Austen's literature made live in theme. And sorry, I got a private message from external chat. I will work on that. And just so everyone knows, they mentioned they'd like me to make my web captioner a little larger. So I'll do that right after I finish talking here. That's one leg. I consumed a lot of this, what we'll call Austen or Austen-esque content growing up through motion pictures, Ang Lee's Sense and Sensibility. But also, I really love the spy thriller, whether it's James Bond or the TV show Alias, or there's a lot of variety throughout the intrigue, mystery, spy thriller genre, whether it's more of an action movie like Jason Bourne, or it digs deeper into the investigation and the psychology. And then lastly, I'm very into exploring the unconscious mind through surrealism and flipping reality completely on its head. So I kind of span the spectrum from small moments in everyday life that are very personal and very intimate to a completely dreamlike state that has only a thread of a structure. Most of the work that I've done with MCG is specifically on the game Invisible Sun, which is a surrealist fantasy. But most of my actual play experience is in games like Good Society, the Jane Austen RPG. Structured, diceless, consent-based role-playing. So that's sort of where I like. And then I have in the middle my vampire spy thriller, Night's Black Agents, kind of balancing the two worlds.
Awesome. And I think, so Grant brings up a really good point. I'm going to give him a minute to adjust his web captioner. But Grant brings up a really good point of the way certain games sort of fit certain genre conventions. And, I feel like I should mention mine since I'm standing here and just asking you all questions. So my favorite genres to play in, I really enjoy a sort of a pulp noir aesthetic, more so than I enjoy a pulp noir genre. And if anybody has played games like LA Noire versus something like, The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, those are both pulp noir games to an extent. They both have very similar sort of fiction, and they have very similar ways they set up the protagonist and the way they treat gameplay design as a whole. There's a wonderful video by Extra Credits about why Witcher 3 Wild Hunt is the best detective game ever made. Highly recommend you check that out, and I will gloss over some of the finer points here. But the idea is basically The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt is a fantasy detective game, more so than it is like a high fantasy genre piece, so to say. Aside from that, I really enjoy I have an extremely huge soft spot for the Western. I grew up on Bruce Lee movies and Westerns. That was what I grew up on when my dad was showing me movies. So that's sort of stuck with me ever since. And then pretty much anything that has an urban fantasy bend to it, again, still sort of in that pulp noir bend and that sort of area. But there is a really good point that, getting back to what I said earlier about Grant, bringing up games that sort of really reinforce the kind of genres and aesthetics that you're looking for. For example, off the top of my head, City of Mist comes to mind as a game that really sort of dials down on the pulp noir urban fantasy, so that hits most of my buttons right there. But it does a very good job in sort of creating this sort of dark city, seedy underbelly full of people just trying to get along and trying to make it in a way that sort of fits that genre of a pulp noir. But I think we'll go down the line again, and we'll sort of talk about maybe a game or one of our favorites that fits the kind of genres that we like to play in, or that we'd like to talk about, and see how those sort of capture that kind of thing. So we'll just go back right down the line again, I guess.
Sure. There's a I compiled a number of different games for this list, and so I'll keep it brief and focus on maybe one or two that I really love that I think really fit this example really strongly. The games and the genres that I end up playing or running are not necessarily the ones that I like find myself going to for media. So, for example, when I first read about Pasión de las Pasiones, I was actually at the Indie Press Revolution booth at PAX a couple of years ago when the Ashcan came out. If I feel like it might have been even last year. It's this whole thing has been a whirlwind, the evolution of that game. But I picked it up and I was shocked to see that someone had written a role-playing game about telenovelas. And as a Latinx person, I have never really been, those have never really been in my my purview, having grown up in a more like white neighborhood and around lots and lots of white people, with very few other Latinx people around me. I know that for my peers who like grew up in other parts of the world, and especially in Spanish speaking countries, telenovelas were so integral to their lives. I would hear about them secondhand, but I had never really seen them outside of a Spanish class. And so I got sort of into the genre through the book. And I think what's so important about that game is it it is written by an own voices author, right? It's also a Latinx creator, Brendan Leon Gambetta. And I think when we're talking about genres that are so intrinsically linked to culture, it is such a minefield to start walking into that genre when you are not of that culture. There's a huge conversation we could have that would take months about like if you are a white creator and you are making a game about wuxia, why? What is it about that genre that makes you excited? And why should we support your game over an Asian creator who might have a deeper connection or a less potentially problematic connection to that genre? But what Passion does so well is that it doesn't focus on crunchy bits in terms of the game. It's all about the narrative, and all of these mechanics make everything work. All of the gears are constantly turning to make telenovela tropes push forward, right? So instead of having damage or stress or anything like that, you're tracking emotional conditions, which are different for every archetype in that game, right? The La Doña doesn't have the same emotional conditions to mark that El Caballero does, because that's just not who that person is. And when they mark all of those emotional conditions, they have a breakdown where they try to get something based on what that archetype demands, right? The La Doña wants everyone to bow at their feet and say, like, I'm cutting you off. El Caballero wants to charge bravely into danger. El Jefe wants to like be the most dangerous person in the room. And each of these all the moves, as a Powered by the Apocalypse game, generate those kinds of beats. I think when you have a PBTA game especially, there's a tendency people have where they say, I need a combat move, I need an investigation move, I need a social move, I need a protection move. You don't need those things for every game if your job is to emulate a genre. Passion doesn't have certain things you might expect, because it's not a game where you go into a 10 by 10 room and kill a bunch of goblins. It's a game where you end up confronting someone about their betrayal, and you demand that they give you what you deserve, which is justice or information or their love. Everything comes back to the emotional. And that is a game that just sings with genre emulation in a way that doesn't feel bloated. I think the last thing I'll say on that is that there's a really dangerous trap you can fall into when you're trying to push genre, that you are focusing on making the rules evocative rather than making the gameplay that those rules are creating evocative.
There's a lot there. Okay, if I should have said this at the beginning. Take notes, people. Like, all these people are really smart.
John,
So we're
your
gonna
grad student is showing.
Oh my god! Yeah,
Screenshot the web captioner. It's
as it goes by. All right, Mackenzie, if you want. So at this point, you can comment, sort of build on, or take it in your direction. I'll leave it all up to you.
I think there's something really. What is something you had said, Simon, about like making sure the mechanics, like some people focus on making the mechanics cool, but some people focus on making the mechanics purvey a certain story. And I think that's definitely clear when you look at a lot of what I've done. Again, hi, I'm the D&D person on this panel. Wahoo! A lot of what I do, especially working with Sina Una, which is a project based on pre-colonial Filipino mythology and really honing in on that element of culture and that element of history. uh, it's been interesting trying to not necessarily rework 5e's mechanics, but more so realizing and breaking down the 5e mechanics and realizing how colonial they are, to put it lightly. They just a teeny bit. And I think because I work so much with D&D, a lot of what I do isn't necessarily I do love looking at other systems, and I love things that have more like the like one page RPGs that like have that sort of Saturday morning cartoon feeling. But when I work with D&D, a lot of it isn't necessarily trying to find ways to break D&D to make it work with a certain genre. It's more realizing these things as they stand currently with the current like 5e tend towards this kind of mindset. If you look at how 5e works and how certain classes work, it tends towards that very much conquering colonialist imperialist mindset. And when you look at things like Sina Una and the way we're breaking it down, we don't have to change a lot of the mechanics necessarily. A lot of the core things, like we still have D20 rolls and we still have like the same base skills and the same base abilities. But the way we shape our subclasses focus on emulating aspects that have not yet been touched or have been since buried underneath the veneer of Western fantasy that D&D currently exists under. So we have different ways of interpreting things. Like for our druid subclass, instead of emphasizing that the druids have control over nature, which is a very much a Western sort of notion, the idea that you can control over something, our druids, the Circle of Tides, focus on working with the ocean and working in tandem with it, always understanding that you cannot necessarily control the ocean, but you can move with it and move alongside it and work together in harmony. And we have a lot of that in how we approach spirituality in Sina Una, regarding animism and the way that the characters coexist alongside spirits and that sort of notion. And again, pulling away from the idea of control and looking more at collaboration and looking at mechanics that reinforce that. In terms of my Feywild game, I also play a little bit around with that because I don't do anything Western fantasy anymore. Whoopsie poopsie. So, and especially because the Feywild game is a guest game, so I bring in new players every week. And so I have to merge what people think about the Feywild with kind of the different ways I want to take it, and looking at the Fae and the Fairy as things that we're afraid of because they are, or they were, something that we thought was foreign or abhorrent or weird. That's what a lot of Western myths around Fae are. taking it in a new direction and looking at fairies in the Feywild as if we as on the material plane look at things in binary, what if there was a place where binary didn't exist, and looking at things more in shades of gray. Instead of having time and space separated, we're able to blend them together, and sort of using the tropes that people have when they come into the idea of fairy tales and Feywild and that sort of very Western trope, and using that to surprise them and put them into a new version of the Feywild that starts to deconstruct a lot of the problematic aspects that the Feywild and that notion is based on. So, yeah.
Awesome. Grant, anything to add, spin-off, and or bring up that we haven't touched on here?
So if I understood the question, because it's been a little while since it's been asked. The question is talking about games and systems and mechanics that help support a specific genre, or how we might take existing mechanics and use our design sensibilities to reframe tropes within a game. Did I understand it?
That's pretty much it. Yep.
All right. Because I'm busy plugging Pasión de los Pasiones on Twitter right now, because you got to hype it. Oh, I held it up and gave away copies at PAX East last year, where it's like, look, y'all. And it was on a panel about playing outside, but we won't go playing outside of our own identities. And I was like, this is a great game, but I must accept that I'm not an expert in this when I agree to play this game. We won't get into that tangent, but what I like about a game like Night's Black Agents, which is powered by a genre-agnostic investigative system called Gumshoe. It's, here's a mechanical framework. You can layer things on top of it to investigate. The designer, Kenneth Haidt, for Night's Black Agents, talked about how this is vampire spy movies. There's different type of vampire movies, there's different type of spy movies, and the group might want to play towards certain themes, and think of it like switching modes, and you can take away from or add to the mechanical framework based on the type of game you're playing. He gives an example where there's the burn mode, where players can take psychological damage if they agree they want to play a game where they're all going to take psychological damage. If that's something they don't want to explore, and maybe they want to go more lo-fi, they don't want, say, James Bond style super science, they can switch to the dust mode, and it can become more of a gritty lo-fi, and they explain what to remove from the game, and maybe you're going to cap your health at a certain level, or maybe they won't allow certain reattempts. Also, they might say they want to do you want to have spies against each other. You want to play a game where you've all agreed that there's PvP, and you've agreed to this mechanic, and you're going to have it in there. So you're going to have mirror mode where your spies competing against each other. Likewise, they say, you might just want to play this one GM and one player. Here's the solo ops. We've removed a lot from the game, so it runs very smooth, very seamless. There's a lot we can cut out of this game and just focus on what's important. And here's some alternatives. So there's still a game here, and it's just completely free form. Likewise, I really like mechanics introduced into Good Society, such as an example is the inner monologue token. You're literally collaborative storytelling in that, like, codified into the rules. This is collaborative storytelling, meaning you're all going to have narrative authority and narrative control. There is no game master, and oftentimes there's no facilitator, but you're going to have to come to a consensus, and they give that to you. A mechanic like the inner monologue token, you have one of these, and you can hand it to a player and say, I want to know what your character is thinking right now. And I played a scene where my character, we played through the cycle, was about to propose to another character. We're playing a romantic comedy. I'd gone broke, but I'd fallen in love with her. I'd been in love with her my whole life. I just never had the guts, but I finally had the guts. I was going to ask her to marry me. She was hoping I would ask her to marry me, but it's like, let's really build this up. I'm going to hand you this monologue token. Let's totally get your characters, like, you're about to have your big, Dashwood breakdown, tears, Emma Thompson just winning an Oscar over this. Let's find out what's going on in your head. And so it built that dramatic moment. But also, say we hand her the inner monologue token and she wasn't going to say yes, we're all going to know. So it's not going to catch me off guard. And I really like games like that because we're all just eating popcorn on the couch while we watch everyone play these games. And I think those kinds of mechanics are very helpful when you're trying to tell specifically those types of stories. Likewise, a note on Good Society is, even though it's the Jane Austen RPG, they include 2 extensive chapters, one that's player facing and one that's general facing. If you've never read an Austen novel and you've never seen any of the movies, they go, here's 5 core principles. You're just playing towards this. Here's 5 core principles, because I'll probably never read an Austen novel, but if I know these are the 5 important things, I can play towards those.
Cool. I actually sort of synthesized a thing from everything that everybody said. We were we're talking about mechanics of playing flexibly with things like time and space and using mechanics that affect a certain vibe. And I want to bring up Fiasco, which is a game that does a lot of these things very well in sort of the setting things up. For those of you who don't know, Fiasco is a game which is a game system with a bunch of different play sets that sort of all have a different affect to them. There's a great playthrough of it on Tabletop where they do sort of a like sleazy disco crime thing. I'm not exactly sure how to quantify it beyond that, frankly. And then, for example, but I've played as something that's very different, where I played, people on a submarine dealing with eldritch monstrosities. And what Fiasco does is it does 2 things really cool, which is it gives you the ability to, as a group, decide whether or not a character is going to get what they want in a scene based on the way it's turned out. And then it also lets you set scenes in different points in time. Because a lot of people you'll see a lot of people will play RPG sort of straight through from 8 in the morning to 8 at night, kind of following a linear timeline. And a genre that I forgot to bring up at the start is like that Grant sort of brought up with Night's Black Agents, is like the heist movie, where you will jump frantically back in time and forward to see where people have set certain things up, and then sort of see those play out in real time, and then something else will have been set up, and they'll jump back another 3 hours and tell you what happened there, and then rewind forward. Sure, why not? That seems right. But what they'll do is they'll play with time in a way that sets up this narrative. And Fiasco will do that. It'll basically say you can play any scene. You can play a flashback immediately after a scene that concludes, or going into a big scene that matters. And that's one thing I want to bring up too in terms of genre, is that make the narrative flow of the way you tell your game is just as important as the mechanics you bring to it. Because if someone can't play with time and do certain scenes in a certain way, that changes the flow of your game, because you're saying this is a very specific sort of linear flow that we are following, and that's how the world moves. Which means if you don't set something up beforehand, you won't get a chance to do it after the fact, which is a perfectly okay way to play, but it doesn't fall within, for example, the genre of something like a heist. And then thinking of just one card and 2 pages, Honey Heist is a great genre piece. It's cartoon bears with hats stealing honey. It is quite possibly like the cutest game ever. Pick it up, find it. It's hysterical. But we sort of got into this the part of this question, like what systems people like for certain things and what mechanics they like to do. And I want to touch on I want to sort of take one example from each of y'all and sort of talk in depth about one piece of that game that you have changed, or that you like, that gives a certain vibe, in order to, because I think we'll get a little technical here in terms of how to design for a genre or an aesthetic. So we'll break it down that way. And so I guess, Simon, if you'd like to start with something that you think sort of works in a way that you appreciate mechanically, that was designed to do that. I mean, you've mentioned a little bit about Pasión de las Pasiones, and you can continue to talk about that. You can bring up something else. It's up to you.
Goodness. Well, I love to play games, so my library is very extensive. So I'm sure, talk everyone's ear off about a million different games. I suppose we'll stick with Pasión for a little bit. So there, of the many things that I like on Pasión, one of them is the fact that it sets up so much history for you right off the bat, and mechanically, it's the last time on rule. So in Pasión de las Pasiones, as a Powered by the Apocalypse game, it still has playbooks for your characters, and those are based on different archetypes within the genre. And so each playbook will get its own unique set of questions that say last time on the show that we're all watching, because the game does a very good job of saying, like, this is a show that we are watching. It is TV. There was an old rule about, like, including family members that are rooting for everyone individually. Like the young girl, like, swoons over the handsome gentleman as he enters the room. But uh, at the beginning of every session, everyone has to tick off one of these boxes from a list of about 8 options that says, like, last time on this show, you showed someone a moment of tender weakness. You swore to take revenge against someone important. You took over a business or political seat as an interim leader. And so we don't need to see that in the fiction because the game doesn't care about those moments. We're establishing backstory for everyone while focusing on the meat and potatoes of the game, the reason that we're playing the game, which is the drama between characters. These all set up dangerous situations for your character, or threads or connections to other people, places we might go, characters we might need to see, side characters, relationships, things like that, motivations, but they all build towards making the world feel alive and like it's moving, and that we this is a separate conversation about backstory, but I think when you're writing a character's backstory, um, if the most important or exciting things have happened to your character already, your character is effectively solved, and I would argue there isn't much reason for you to be playing that character. I would rather play a character who has had a few things happen to them and has yet to have the most interesting things that are going to happen to them come out during the course of play. In our home LARP, where when I run games for players, you come in with like 3 bullet points that are like, this is who I am, this is what I want, this is what I'm running away from. Here's why I came to the community. Um, and when you only have 3 bullet points to play with, you have to be very, very tight about the concept for your character, who they are, what they want, and why they're there. So the same establishing rules in improvisational theater, right? When you walk into a scene, in your first line, you should establish your relationship between everyone in the room, where you are, what you're doing, and what you need to do to end that scene. Um, and so it's really hard for a lot of people to do that in the moment. Not everyone is a trained improviser or even someone who has taken an improv class at one point in their life. Sometimes we need to talk out in a very meta way. Well, this is what's going to happen. This is what I want to happen to my character. And the last time on rule builds some of that set dressing without having to have people come up with these elaborate backstories. We'll worry about it when it becomes important. But the second we introduce it, we know that it's going to be important later on because it's happened like 6 episodes ago before we even got to the table. And then also, once all those boxes are ticked off, that's the end of the game. You have your series finale. And that is, I think, another really important thing that's like, it's not just for the genre that the end of the season comes when you've done all these interesting things, but to time box your game, I think, is very respectful to the people that are running it and to the people that are playing it. And so you feel like you have closure, and you don't just have your sprawling West Marches D&D campaign that goes on for 6 months and then everyone falls apart because you get a new job or you leave, and we never know what happens to those characters, you know.
Yeah. Okay. So up to Mackenzie. You're muted.
I'm a professional. Hi. So what we're talking about, how we use mechanics to convey a certain story element. What exactly are we honing in on?
Okay,
Again.
so basically, we're looking at mechanics in games that sort of drive towards a certain aesthetic feel,
Okay.
or sort of push a trope. And so you've talked about this a little bit in the way that like D&D's mechanics are very much based on the sort of the Campbell or hero like journey of a hero archetypes. But I was like, if there's any like, we're gonna get a little bit nitty gritty here, I think, because we've got a little bit of time to talk design.
Okay, so cool. Well, because I haven't burned enough bridges with WotC, let's talk about the love domain again. Yeah, let's bring that, because that for me was a really good example of how you can have an idea, but when your mechanics are wrong, or when your mechanics don't necessarily support that idea, no matter how much flavor text you add, it's not going to make it actually about what you want it to be about. So like, and then I can talk about my own experience designing around that same narrative idea and the narrative concept of love, because I did make I spite and made a subclass for it. So if we're looking at the old version of the love cleric and looking at how that love domain had functioned, there was two parts of it. You had the flavor text that was like, love is great and you can love so many people and it can be romantic or platonic or family or whatever. And then you looked at the actual mechanics that form the base of the class. When you looked at it, the biggest things were that the keystone mechanic of the subclass was a bond feature. The bond feature could only be for two characters. It was only a pair, and that was how, when you leveled up in that subclass, that bond just got stronger and you got more benefits you could bestow upon those two individuals. Then there was the channel divinity that was very much based not on love but infatuation, and looking at charming and that sort of deal. I'm not gonna go over how we're not gonna touch in more in detail about how why that was questionable in terms of like the content and going deep into the assault implications, because we don't those aren't important, but it's just one of those things where it shows that even though the flavor text was something that had that was attempting to show different kinds of love, the fact that the bond feature was only between two characters, and then that the channel divinity was showed that it didn't exactly go well. So approaching the idea as a designer myself, I wanted to do something, because look, I had talked a bunch online like this could be done better. I had to back up my words. So what I had done was I approached the idea of what makes love important and what makes love strong. And for me, approaching it was the idea that it's not necessarily love itself, it's the people you love. And focusing on that idea of love is formed by um the relationships you have with people, and that idea of family and trust and connecting with others. And so that led me to the idea of the registering of fate, and that idea of forming bonds with each other and learning how to express love via your connection with others, because love itself as an idea was too amorphous. And when we saw through like the how WotC had attempted to narratively convey love through mechanics, if you approach it as just sort of an amorphous ideal, it sort of falls apart. When you approach it through the idea of who you love and how you love them, and how your love manifests in between people, that is different, and that is stronger and more unique, and also has that implication where you can or not implication, that has the ability so you can apply it to a romantic relationship or a familial relationship. It leaves it open for polyamory. It leaves it open for found families and ace arrow folks. And so that's what I had focused in my class, and looking at having an ability that connects you as a character to everyone else that you interact with, and everyone you count as part of your family or you're bonded to, and being able to protect them or buff them or help them. And focusing on looking at mechanics that work as as a team, because if love is based on who you love, then the mechanics need to be based on who you love and who you support. And so that has been, I think, the best example I can see of, as a designer, looking at how I want to convey a concept and how it can be done right and how it can be done wrong.
So we will get back into that in a second too, because you brought up another really good point, which is the pitfalls of trying to do something with an aesthetic specific design. But either maybe, I think, unless Grant, you want to jump in on that particular section.
I don't want to jump in right on that one, but I would like to answer the question and talk about some of the design of the game that might help handle the genre, especially, I think really communication skills are the most important thing when we agree to play these games with each other. And when I say it's the most important thing, that's just me. I speak in very dramatic, intense, hyperbolic language. It's the most important thing to me right now. Communication, making sure that I understand what people are saying as well as that I am understood. Something I'm talking a lot about good society. Something good society does is it has a phase of the game that is often reflected upon, engages with the mechanics, and you come back to it consistently, called collaboration. Before you ever start playing the game, they want the players to talk about what Austin means to the group, because it's going to mean different things. And people are going to have different ideas about they're going to have different ideas about what they want to see in the game. So you start there and you figure out everyone's baseline. Then you talk about the tone of the story. Are we going to play a drama? Is this going to be hard hitting? Likewise, maybe it's a romantic comedy. Maybe our actions are going to have consequences, but it's not going to be consequences that last for generations, like it does in my actual family. Or maybe we're playing a farce. We're turning it to the Oscar Wilde mode of the game, where we're going to be playing it for laughs and nothing is going to be taken too seriously. Then we want to decide how important historical accuracy is. It might be very important what Napoleonic War was occurring during the year and what flowers were growing while we were stationed in certain nations. So when we write our poems to each other, we have the right flora in those letters. Or maybe it's less important, or maybe we don't understand the history at all. We'll try our best. But you get to set these dials and you get to talk about it. And you might say it's somewhat important. They're like, we'll never interrupt play to correct the flower grant references. I don't know if Jess G's in the chat. I saw her earlier, but she will after the session say, no, this is the flower they would have used that meant that was around in Regency England, which I love. It helps me learn. Likewise, when you're playing Austen literature, it's a historical Regency patriarchy. But the game has styles you can set. Do you want that? Maybe you want to turn that off. Maybe you want to reverse it and make it a matriarchy. But you get to decide as a group what it means to you. Likewise, are you going to play with open secrets or no secrets? And then are there things you want to avoid in the game? Some people might refer to this as lines and veils. Some people might refer to it as off camera and out of bounds. But the important thing is, regardless of what you refer to it as, the game wants you to address what's off the table and can't be included in the game. But also, they want to give content promises, not just warnings. What do we want to see in this game? Let's all agree. If we want to have a big, messy banquet where our families are getting into it and like the drama from all these decades overflows, let's put that on the table. Or if we want to avoid it, we can. Likewise, the game has you create a play set, which includes, you've played it with me, John. There's cards, and the cards have prompts. But also, you notice when we played, we didn't follow our card verbatim. It pointed us in the right direction. And we were able to use that to collaborate and make a story that I hope, my hope, may I hope, as they say in good society. But my hope is we were able to use those mechanics as the baseline and then use our conversation and communication skills to work together to play a game that created an emotional experience that we all agreed upon, that this is where we'd all like to land.
Yeah, I think sort of tagging off the last two sort of comments and what we're talking about, I think one of the things that's really that we're some sort of getting from the sort of the combination of the answers is that it helps a lot if you start by playing a game with an intention to it. And if you're thinking really intentionally about what it is you're trying to play, the kind of things you want to have. And sort of touching sort of on when, on genre tropes that are not particularly helpful, since this is a thing that sort of we've done this, I'm going to offer up my own, I'm going to crucify my own favorite genre. So let's talk about the Western for a second. For those of you who have ever watched a Western or played in a game that is of that genre, there are a lot of things baked into the Western genre that aren't great. And I'm not going to go into too much detail. I'm going to mention a couple of what those things are. We're not going to I will tell you, like, if you want to see an example of all the horrible things that can happen in a Western, just go watch Westworld. Like that, there are so many things that happen in that show. But we touch a lot on things like both domestic and sexual assault, bigotry, discrimination, harassment, just jokes about mental health, like misogyny, expansionism, colonialism, imperialism, exploitation, erasure of every minority from the West. And that's the handful I read off of a 3-page statement I wrote when designing a Western game. It is a problem because a lot of people, when they come to play a Western, will assume that that's what's going to happen because they know that that's the genre they're playing in, and so they kind of expect things like casual misogyny. Don't let casual misogyny into your game. That's all I'm saying. Like if you know, for example, that the Western has these problematic tropes, it enables you to bring them up at the start of the game and say, hey, so this traditionally is a thing that happens in games like this. Do we want to opt out of this noise because nobody at the table, or some people, or even one person at the table doesn't want to deal with it because that person is trying to have fun? Like, the point of a game is to have fun together and to enjoy our time. If someone isn't doing that, you are failing in some capacity or another, I think. So I think the thing is, you've got to be really intentional to know what the genre. The reason I wanted, for example, I want to do this panel on genre and not specifically just on design, is because knowing what the sandbox you are playing in can give you an idea of the kind of stumbling blocks you're going to run into. And we sort of had Mackenzie and Grant's take on this, and Simon, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to sort of a problem you've seen in running a game that has a very specific genre bend to it that you can elaborate on, but I wanted to give you the option to open up on it since we are
absolutely. In my youth, I played a lot of Call of Cthulhu, and read a lot of it because there was I also, like many people, I think, am interested in the ideas of eldritch horror and investigation, and horror investigation games. But as we know, as many of us know, perhaps more of us should learn, H.P. Lovecraft was a virulent racist, and a generally vile human being. And role-playing games that emulate Lovecraft do not think about the extremely racist history that they are bringing into their game by pulling from the Cthulhu mythos. Everything is about the fear of the other, the exoticization of other people, indigenous beliefs, and other religions being demonic or otherwise dangerous. And so what I really appreciated was when I picked up Fate of Cthulhu, that the initial setup for the game is like, here's the genre. We're doing Lovecraftian horror, but we're turning everything on its head. There's a whole massive block of text which made the rounds on the internet, about the belief.
Fate of Cthulhu, I think, is what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. Fate of Cthulhu. Yeah, there was a whole block about Lovecraft was a racist, and we're not doing that. We're not doing that in our game. And it sets the whole game as like Terminator, with like time travel. You're going back and you're fixing things, and empowering people rather than playing into the genre's tropes of like making light of mental health and mechanizing mental health struggles and things like that with like sanity rules and things like that. And that's something that I appreciated because that genre is so dangerous to play in.
Actually, to bring up a really good point too, you really only need to look at the flurry around that page. Like, if you look at the book in Fate of Cthulhu, it's like that much in a book on one page. And it caused a lot of like, just hubbub. A lot of people basically came out against this game saying that isn't the thing that Cthulhu is. This is kind of what we're talking about, right? People go in expecting a Cthulhu game, and they expect, for the most part, extremely whitewashed existential dread of other things showing up to break down the walls of reality. Fate of Cthulhu is, as Simon said, like an almost sci-fi-esque like pulp beat 'em up shooter, kind of, in a certain way, where you're going back in time, because and what it does is it does the same thing that Cthulhu, like the Cthulhu mythos says, right? Which is to say, you cannot fight Cthulhu. Like, it's just not going to happen. So Fate of Cthulhu says, well, then screw that. We're not going to fight Cthulhu. We're going to go back in time and stop Cthulhu from ever showing up, because that's the only way you can do it. And that is a genre shift from what a lot of people will think of when they say the Cthulhu mythos. That caused a lot of people to get very, very mad. Now, okay, obviously, I don't necessarily agree with their anger personally, because this game was never set up to be a Cthulhu mythos style game.
Well,
right?
If I might interject too,
Totally.
There's a genre of cosmic or eldritch horror, and then there's the genre that we might call Terminator movie, right? You can take these elements and mix them and mash them however you want. Like, I could put Cthulhu in the Toon RPG and have him get knocked out in a boxing match by Foghorn Leghorn. People might not like that, but it's like, hey, but I'm playing the Saturday morning cartoon game. This is a character that could be in it. Likewise, you might take elements from it and sprinkle them in. I mean, I remember back when I was in film school, every now and then I would take not Cthulhu or anything Lovecraft, but I might take an idea and pay it a little bit of attention based on maybe something that was going on in history, without going into that genre, right? So I get people complaining, but it's like you don't have to play the game. You can, at the beginning of the day, if you want to play it, I'd love to go back in time and prevent Cthulhu from existing. I already know the character I'd want to play, and it's like, let me in on that. There's plenty of cosmic horror. Yeah, there's plenty of cosmic horror RPGs. There has been for 40 years. Let's do something different, right?
Right. Not every game is for every person, and there's a whole thing that's like, why is this not the thing that I want it to be? Because it's not for you, and that's fine. You have to get right with that.
Yeah. You can probably find the game that is for you. You just need to look a little bit further, and because there's so many games. There's so many games, especially now when we are starting to really diversify the sort of the scope and the landscape of what kind of games exist. You can find something for you. And maybe that something isn't Cthulhu plus Doom. But for a lot of people, myself included, Cthulhu plus Doom sounds awesome.
We're all in.
Right? So, that's the kind of thing to really think about, too, is the genre carries you a certain way when everyone at your table has a buy-in into what they expect to happen. And every panel I do, I don't want to boil it back down to really talk at session 0, but really it's talk at session 0, right? And then that will not only help you discover what your players want to play, but also the kind of genre and the game people are looking to play. And if the game that you were thinking of using doesn't fit anything any of you want to play, maybe find another one that does, or use the same one you're using and fiddle with it. I homebrew stuff all the time. Do whatever will bring it easier for your group to intentionally play the game that they want to play. So we're actually doing pretty good on time here. We've got a couple extra minutes left. So real quick, if there's anything, I think if everyone has any other thoughts, I want to sort of give you the space to talk about them here. Anything you want to bring up from the conversation we've had, or just if there's something that you want to spitball off of from where we sort of came in. But I will give people the chance to do that now, and then I will also real quick, if you're in the audience and you have a question about any of the stuff that we've talked about really quickly, if you want to throw that in the chat over the next 5 or 10 minutes or so, that'll give us about just enough time to sort of answer your questions and wrap up, which puts us, I think, right on schedule if I'm reading my times correctly. So otherwise, yeah. Okay. Yeah, so either Simon, Mackenzie, or Grant, anything else you want to sort of touch on that we might have missed or kind of glossed over and you want to expand on?
Did we answer all 4 of the original questions you had down?
We did. We combined them. We ended up combining a couple, which is super cool.
Okay.
That's how good we are.
Yeah. Hey, I ran out. I was like, oh, we have flowed right into 3. Oh, we're in 4 now. Okay, cool. But yeah, I think we've answered all the questions that I want to bring up for the panel. Unless there's anything else people want to sort of bring up and talk about.
I had a quick thought, which is that system matters and system doesn't matter. Like you can play whatever game you want. I think that's a given, right? We all know that you can pick up any game. You can try and run a telenovela in D&D if you want. You can try and run like Leverage using Fiasco or Shadowrun or anything like that. You can use any mechanical rule set you want, but you're not always going to get the right results or the results that you're expecting out of hacking a given system if you're not looking at what that system does and why it does it. And so I think when you're looking to emulate genre specifically, you need to be very conscious about what system you're using and why you're doing it, as opposed to just starting and ending that whole design journey with, I know the system, like I know Fate. I will write a game I'm using Fate. Great, but what does Fate mechanically do to emulate what you're trying to do? I want to use PBTA. PBTA is a perfect genre simulator ethos, and the core engine I think a lot of people have been iterating on. If you look at early games like Monster of the Week, for example, a game that I'm prepping to run, it's showing its age. It does do some of its genre emulation, but I think a newer sensibility take on that game would look very, very different. The way that something like Cartel looks at other games and like combat and says, we don't have a fighting move necessarily. Like you can beat people up, but there's a move for when you get fucking shot, this happens and you probably die. And you don't roll that, you don't put that in your game unless you want someone to die. You are declaring narrative authority when you shoot another character because you want that to happen. Other games will say like, I roll to hit that guy and I roll this much damage. No, in other games that have more concrete narrative tools, you're just saying that. And so I think when you go, if you are an aspiring designer or a game hacker, or even just a GM, when you go to pick up a game and run it, think about what that system is doing. Is that system going to emulate what you want? Because Shadowrun is, for example, a game that is a bunch of mechanics. It is not necessarily a genre simulator in the way that The Veil is for transhumanist sci-fi, or the Sprawl is for that sort of cyberpunk mission-based gameplay.
Yeah, I almost exclusively will take the setting of Shadowrun and run it in something else.
The Sprawl with the Touch Prime supplement.
I don't have time for a bathtub of D6s. But yeah, we'll leave that floor open if people want to sort of catch on to that. But we do have an audience question if we want to get to those as well.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, it is a really good question, but I want to make sure I have time for everyone to sort of wrap up final thoughts before we bounce into it. Mackenzie, Grant, anything from y'all?
So I had a thought, and then I lost it because I found myself agreeing with Simon so much. I was just like, yeah, fuck yeah.
Oh, my bad.
No, that you're good, right? Going along with that, and we're talking a lot about genre as well. I think it's important to look at also systems that are genre agnostic and seeing what they do to supplement and point you towards genres, as well as they might tell you what the idea of their system does. For example, Gumshoe's investigation, Cypher Systems exploration, 5e SRD is combat. You know, it just as it's framed, it's like, these are the rules, these are what we're pointing through. And then think about how you might do it. Also, check to see if someone's authored a system and you're not designing from scratch, see if they offer suggestions or if there's other people in the community that have used it and have found either success or failure while emulating genre. And I also think I'd encourage you, while you play these games, to think about what truth you speak into the fiction of the game that you're playing when you have narrative authority and sort of what it means. Think about how everyone at the table is going to feel. Listen, particularly if you're someone like me that does a lot of talking, take a step back and just listen to everyone else. It's interesting. I edit a lot of podcasts now, which is different than producing actual play. When I'm actually doing the podcast editing, there's a lot of little nuance in every player that is very informative to me. And it actually helps me be better prepared for future sessions. And I think that's very important to genre, trope, and it might even prompt conversations that you need to have either during, before, or after the game.
Solid point. Mackenzie, anything you'd like to touch on that?
I mean, I think I really like the idea of realizing like you don't need rules for everything depending on the genre and the story you're going for. Like you mentioned Honey Heist, which is one of my favorite games. And I've designed something similar with Bird Brains, which is noir pigeon detectives, which is a genre I never thought would exist, but here we are.
I
And
want to
like
play that aggressively, by the way.
it's so much. It's like I think if you're looking at it in terms of designer, it's really interesting how much like you're saying like with Fatler, you can just be like, yeah, I shoot him and he's dead now, and how much control that can have versus like doing damage. Like in Bird Brains, because it's a one pager, I don't have rules for damage. I don't have rules for pigeon death. I didn't think that far, but I don't think it necessarily matters because of the genre. Like it's a Saturday morning cartoon, sort of silly noir pigeon Saturday morning cartoon animals doing things sort of deal. Death doesn't exist in those universes. No, like Wally Coyote can fall off the cliff as many times. He ain't gonna die. Same thing with like these birds. They ain't gonna die. And like even intentionally adding mechanics that are just ridiculous, like you can roll for poop in Bird Brains. You have a stat that's just poop, and you can roll for that, and that sets so much tone to like how you can play and sets so much it narratively frames the game itself in like so few words, just depending on like what you can and can't do. And I think there's a lot to be said about you don't have to have rules for everything, as long as you have enough rules and enough framework to set up the story you want your game to tell.
Awesome. Actually, that's a really good point, because that brings us right into our audience question, which is there a genre you want more games set in? And we're gonna bounce right down again, just because that seems to be the easiest logistical thing for me to keep on straight. So Simon, is there a genre that you want more games in?
Anything that is not like the big pillars of fantasy adventure, sci-fi, space exploration, space opera, cyberpunk, without examining what punk actually means and only focusing on cyber. Um, literally anything, but a few that come to mind. I would love. I'm all about the Latin explosion that's happening with games like Passion, with games like Cartel. I want to see more games that are about Latin Nahual. Friggin' Nahual is blowing me away conceptually with its design and its genre. About being like native first, like own voices, Latinx people in Mexico who are descended from spirits, like angel hunters, angels being brought by the Spanish when they came to colonize the place and never leaving and exploiting the people. And now you are hunting them and chopping them up, and maybe you sell them in the back of your taco truck as a cover. That is so evocative and flavorful. And there's so many things you can play around in that space, that there are so many elements to the myriad Latinx identities that exist, that we are just not seeing because people feel like they have to write another fantasy heartbreaker to be noticed in the design space, to hitch your horse to the major wagons to be able to make a buck, and then everything else will be your passion project. I don't believe in that. I think that we can do better. But another thing I would love to see more of is cozy games in RPGs. We're in a time where Animal Crossing is blowing up, where Stardew Valley really opened people's minds to the idea of what a game can be about that isn't just about conflict, where kindness is not only encouraged, but like the point of the game. And I think having games where you can express kindness and connection to other people, I'm writing a game that's like a LARP that's not about fantasy adventure. It's about what happens when you make camp between each of the places on your journey. And so you just sit, the whole game is just you sit around the fire and you cook food, you sharpen your weapons, you adjust your armor, and you talk about where you've been and where you're going, what you're afraid of, what you're hoping to find, where the places you've been. You share songs and stories. The moment right now in 2020 where so many things are happening that are affecting people very deeply emotionally, we need more games, I think, that let you express that kind of connectivity, and foster community, and kindness.
Awesome. Also, I want to play that. You live near me. I don't have an excuse. So let's see, Mackenzie. What about you?
Um, I I want to play more games that I think I'm always a sucker, and I mentioned this at the beginning, so this is going a bit full circle. I'm really a sucker for uh the YA stories I grew up with. A lot of the scrappy teenagers or scrappy students find out they have magic. Woo! And I want to play more games like that, cuz gosh, life is boring and I'm tired of being just a boring college student. I want to get some magic powers. I want to go save the world. I want to finish my degree, but I'd rather go save the world, please. Give me games that let me save the world while also being a college student.
Can I get a degree in world saving, please?
Please, can I go save the world and also get A? Thank you. That's my jam, and that's something I love, and I want more games that play around the idea of like how Masks does, like balancing the mundane with your superhero. I want more games like that where it's like you're a teenager and also you gotta save the world, but also you have to maintain cover as a teenager. And I love that, and I want more of that. I just need more of it.
Nice. Grant, what about you?
More slice of life genres. I designed a game where the scenes were determined by the success and failure of the local sports team, because there are some communities that are intrinsically tied to how the local sports team's doing. I noticed this as I was driving through Baltimore to pick up a friend to actually drive them to PAX East last year, and just the highways named after a ball player. And we talked about on the drive, it's like, yeah, when the team's doing well, morale's up. When it's low. And so the result of our games were based on the local sports team. And I say slice of life because I think the situations in the game, I really find beauty in what sometimes is called the mundane. It's those small moments that mean a lot. I'm going to drop a link to a game in the Twitch chat, to a game called Fight with Spirit. It's the high school sports RPG by Story Brewers, which is they're a pair of Australian-based developers. But it's all about passion, friendship, and victory, and being part of that high school sports team, and getting it on. I find just like this pure joy in engaging with those sorts of games, and I really appreciate the games that have been mentioned so far, just because there's a lot of cool things happening. And a lot of times we feel like we might need a hitch to a wagon, but like I always believe in look at the people that are pulling their own wagons and building their own wagons, throw them tools, throw them resources, and help uplift them, because that's how we get to the next maxim. And most people that know me in design, I talk about these slopes, the maximum, the highest point you can reach. We're actually probably on a lower slope. There's a much higher slope. So you need to look at people that are pushing games, creating new games, providing new voices into the industry, and listen to those voices. So Fight with Spirit's an example of a game like that, where you have two designers on the other side of the world that wanted to make this high school sports RPG. A lot of the game, Pasión de las Pasiones. My wife and her family are all from Chihuahua, and they saw me bring that home, and they were like, now we're talking. Put that D&D away. We've got a game to play tonight. Or even on my silly pro wrestling RPGs. Here for it.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I think that one of the really cool things about it too is like there are so many games, we've been talking about, like there's so many games coming out that do these things for you. One of the examples I want to bring up is actually a LARP that I found really recently. There's two, to bounce onto the slice of life train. There's two LARPs I found that are really great. One written by a Chinese author, which is just called Dim Sum, where you spend the entire time playing like a passively aggressively insulting Chinese family having dinner, and just insulting each other for like an hour. It is a little too close to my family life to play like with any degree of removal whatsoever. But it exists, and it's just it is encouraged that you and your friends go out to go like eat dim sum and play this at dinner with each other. And then the best part is it gives you a bunch of rules on how not to be like that asshole at a game with that specific level of genre convention, which I appreciate. And then the second one I found is a game called Send Nudes, N00DS. And the goal is you play the rotating service staff at a noodle shop set in a cyberpunk universe where you just really want all these Shadowrunners to go the hell away because they keep bringing trouble and they keep starting bar fights, and you would really appreciate if they would just leave you alone so you could like make your living and go home. And so as Mac was saying, putting our money where our mouth is, my friend AJ and I designed a game called Worse Today, and it's a game based around that exact concept. You play the wait staff at a restaurant, the restaurant where every martial arts movie fight happens. So everyone, it's a never-ending slew of people, like bad guys running into your restaurant and hiding in the back room, and the villain coming in, them having this big confrontation in your dining room. And speaking of stats that exist in the world like that, one of our stats is just ass, stands for kick ass, haul ass, and like it basically is your try not to get like wrecked by a goon and get the hell out of dodge stat. But the goal is you play these characters who are just trying to get on with their lives of serving food in a restaurant or in like a market stall in a street. And the GM's sole duty is to choreograph this massive, beautiful, like martial arts fight scene that you are desperately trying not to be a part of. Like, I love games that take the genre we expect like that and say, no, you don't want to have anything to do with this. You're too busy dealing with like, oh god, they knocked over the vase. Someone catch it, please. Oh no, that someone is me. And then you have to make like a diving slide the body to like catch the vase before it lands on the ground and breaks. And then you have to explain it to your boss in phase 4. That's the kind of game that I really enjoy, is ones that sort of take that genre and flip it on its head. The other one that I really want to shout out, because I've been harping on the Western all this panel, is Dark Hughes Studios' Haunted West, which is a gorgeous sort of like shining a spotlight on sort of the minorities that the Hollywood Western has wiped away, and sort of bringing up to the forefront all of these diverse people who existed in this in the historical West in a weird Western kind of version. Other than that, I think, unfortunately, we are at like 5 minutes, so I want to go a quick turnaround and get everyone to be able to plug their stuff one more time for everyone who's on this panel. For all of you who were listening, thank you so much. We are at like 30-something, 40-something people last time I checked, and it's fantastic that y'all tuned in to like listen to us ramble about genre for a bit. But I want to start with Simon and sort of where can we find you? What are you up to? What's something coming up? Anything you can talk about.
Right on. I'll keep it as tight as I can. So hello, once again, I've been Simon. You can find me on Twitter at Lucha Libris, like the book. It's also the handle for my itch, and to shamelessly plug something that does genre emulation that I've written recently, I wrote a game called Fur One Night Only, F-U-R, which is a parody of the film Cats. And if you want to play a game that is about being a cat where one of you at the table will eventually betray the rest of them because you're trying to steal the ability to ascend to the heavens. Also, while throwing a lot of digs at musical theater tropes like cueing the music and having song and dance numbers and solos and things like that. You can check that out on my itch page. It's under the same handle. I'll put a link in the chat. Tonight at 8:30 Eastern, I will be GMing a game of Cartel on Welcome to the Party, which you should check out. And tomorrow, I'm a regular cast member on Welcome to the Party, Sundays at 3 p.m. Eastern. We play the Worldwide Wrestling game RPG. That's another excellent example of genre emulation. And if you want to hear my voice in other contexts, sometimes I am a voice actor for the Penumbra podcast, a queer sci-fi and fantasy audio drama. You can find them on Twitter at the Penumbra Pod and on the internet at thependumbrapodcast.com.
Okay, Mackenzie.
Oh, hi. I'm Mackenzie Lane Day on Twitter. I'm an independent TTRPG content creator. Most often you can find me over on the Scraticus Academy every Wednesday at 6 p.m. EST, DMing Downside Up, a Feywild game that is set in my version of Feywild, which is a little bit more mechanical, a little bit more creepy carnival, very much fun. I get to do creepy children voices, creepy hag voices. It's a fun time. You can also check me out next Friday over on the D&D channel in Tales from the Mist, where I play Sorrow, a half-elf monk of the Way of Shadow monk. And that's the finale of my arc is this a week from yesterday, so that's going to be exciting. And then I usually just yell on Twitter about a bunch of things, so you can follow me there. It's on the screen.
All right, Grant, bringing up the end for us here.
Hello, my name's Grant Ellis. I'm the producer for WebDM's Twitch channel. I'm a tabletop RPG game designer. I currently have books coming out, I think 3 with 2C Gaming, a couple for Saturday morning scenarios. But if you follow me on Twitter at WisePapaGrant, you can kind of find out the things that I'm doing. The genres are wide and split apart in all those. But most importantly, this is a stream for charity as well. Do support the Tiltify link, Doctors Without Borders. And again, thank you, John, for having us on here.
Absolutely my pleasure. Honestly, y'all were great, and it was an honor to be up here with all you talking about stuff for an hour and 20 something minutes. I'm Ryo Masa. You can find me down below, RY0MASA on Twitter. I do a bunch of designing. I also play on an upcoming D&D campaign set in a homebrew world called Thrall on Unmade Gaming Tuesdays at 8. And then I'm also playing in the New Acadian Knights Urban Shadows campaign on Scraticus Academy at 9:30 p.m. EST, both of them p.m. EST Eastern. So also, last lightning round questions. We have a little bit of time left. If any of you had to choose a movie or some piece of multimedia to base a game on, which one would you choose? We're going to try to do this real fast. So Simon, what do you got?
Snowpiercer or Courage the Cowardly Dog.
Okay, completely different spectrum. Love it. Mackenzie, any choices?
The current driving force for my Feywild game, Epic Mickey.
Fair. Grant, what about you?
Gosh, you're asking the person with the film degree.
I know.
Abers. No, I think what I would do is I'd probably screw it. The Muppets Take Manhattan. We're writing a musical, and we're going to be on Broadway.
That's awesome.
Speak from the heart if you don't know what to say. I was like,
no. Beautiful. My two choices are with Simon. I'm also on a very large spectrum. It is either the John Wick cinematic universe or Amadeus the movie. Yes. I want to make jealous, fighty opera singers the Good Society serum. I'm already working on it. That's a cheating question. I'm already starting. But that's what we're working on because screw it. Other than that, like I said before, this is CouchCon 2020. Please donate to Doctors Without Borders if you have the spoons and money. We would really appreciate it. They're doing a really great job of doing the things we wish some governments were doing. Other than that, this is a con. Enjoy. Try not to get bogged down in the weight of the real world. I'm sorry. And in that, I think we're gonna pass out. I'm gonna pass out. Then I'll be back in 15 minutes to play a game. Other than that, thank you all for joining us. Thank you all for these. That way? This way? I don't know. Some direction. This direction. This direction. All of these panelists over here being awesome. Check them out on social media. Follow their stuff. And with that, thank you all for tuning in. Bye-bye.
All right, everyone. Stick around. In half an hour, we're going to be playing Brinkwood over here. Ciao.
Voice of God. You heard it.
Yeah.
God?